Hi, everybody, and blessings on today's full moon. For us in the Southern Hemisphere, this is the Beltane full moon, so the full moon that celebrates the rites of spring. So we're at the halfway point between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, and it's a time of great fertility in the land. It's when, the sap is rising in the trees and everything is lush. It said that the Earth Mother is wearing her new green coat. And where I live, we've had a lot of rain and everything is absolutely flourishing. I've got magnolias in full bloom. So it's certainly a time of
blessing.
Oh,
is
goodness.
absolutely flourishing.
Great.
I've got magnolias and
there we go. Sorry about that. There seems to be a thing where it opens up in Facebook afterwards and there's a delay. Anywho, for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, this is the Swain full moon. So this is the full moon closest to that halfway point between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. So this is a time when the shadow really comes up. So what it is that we've denied, that we've disassociated from, we've rejected and judged in ourselves, and it really comes up to show itself. And full moon, whilst I'm speaking about the seasonal festivals, full moon brings everything up to a head. And this one more so than most, because today is a partial lunar eclipse. So it won't be what's called a total blood moon, because it's 3 degrees off being an exact total eclipse, but it's very close. So today, and in fact, this whole sort of 6-week period is really going to navigate us, point us in the direction of where we're headed in the next 6 months. So it's a time of big change, and I've done a whole video specifically on the influences for this full moon today, the partial lunar eclipse. And if you want more info about that, just scroll down here on the page and you'll see a link. But what I'm going to be discussing today, which feels quite timely, is you might have heard of the concept of the Great Deceiver, dun, 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 which sounds very intense. Basically, this refers to a deception that has been perpetrated on humanity. And it's referred to in the book of Revelations in the Christian Bible. And the word revelations comes from the Latin revelatio, meaning to reveal the truth. And in the ancient world, that was the role of the priestesses, to reveal the truth through gnosis, through inner knowing or intuition. And the last since May 2020, when the lunar nodes moved into North Node Gemini, South Node Sag, that's been our group lesson, to discern what is true and what is an illusion being cast. So it's never been a more potent time to activate your intuition, because truth is something we feel, okay? It's felt within the body. The body is the barometer of the soul, to quote Helen Moontill. So we feel truth. Something either resonates within us as true or it feels off. So today it felt like a very auspicious time to do a video. For those of you that have been following me, you'll know that for the last 2 full moons, I've done a live sort of deconstructing my book, The Grail, the first 3 chapters, which are now available for those who pre-order it on Kindle. And there's a link in this post if you want to know more about the book. But let's just pull it up. There's many, many quotes about the Great Deceiver, but in Revelations 12:9, it says, "So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth. His angels were cast out with him." Well, let's just deconstruct that for a moment before I speak about the Grail. You may have heard of, men seeking the Grail and slaying the dragon. This is in itself a distortion. So the dragon woman referred to the Magdalene or the high priestess who initiated men into the Grail. So she was a woman who had activated her serpent of light, her serpent power, which is the energy of the earth. And so the Roman Empire, who persecuted Yeshua, who was then renamed Jesus, they took the teachings and the practices that he was disseminating and they distorted them to create their own religion, a cult of the empire. And this was the only thing people were allowed to practice. But because the Grail was so popular before the rise of the empire that went through using brute force, violence to slay village after village after village of these peaceful agricultural indigenous people, that they had to absorb the ancient celebrations, the ancient practices from this earlier religion of love, which was not about polyamory, not, free love, so to speak, but it was about developing one's capacity to give and receive love through developing self-love, brotherly love, sisterly love, devotional love, service to the earth, and so on. So in the ancient world, if it was said that if men didn't seek the Grail, that the world would fall into a state of decay. And that is what we're now seeing. Okay, so this revelation, this revealing of truth is very, very timely. Now, how can you seek something if you don't know what it is? If you don't know what you're looking for, then you've failed before you've even started. Okay, and this is why there was so much misinformation deliberately disseminated about the Holy Grail. Okay, it was to cast confusion. So that is why the Holy Grail has long been considered the greatest mystery. Okay, so for those of you that love unsolved mysteries, welcome. But yeah, this is the one that I have been working to decode for the better part of the last 2 decades, and helped by my ancestors, because I have Welsh ancestry on both sides. And so today I'm going to be deconstructing chapter 2 of my book, which is What is the Grail? Discerning Fact from Fiction. So first of all, let's just identify all the claims that have been made about the Grail. Some say that it's a vial of precious blood. Others say it's a blinding white light. Others say it's the Celtic cauldron of plenty. Others say it is a secret book or gospel. Others say it is a philosopher's stone. Some say it is the chalice that Jesus used in the Last Supper. Some say that it is the blood of Jesus that was collected while he was being crucified on the cross. And then there are the later claims that it is the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and it signified her womb. So I'm here to tell you that it is some of those, and some are a complete red herring that have been put in there deliberately to throw us off the scent. So let me just check in and see who's with us live. If you are with me live, just do a bit of a shout out. I can't see it on the page. Weird. No. Oh, well. I'm coming in via Zoom to Facebook, so apologies if I can't see your messages. Oh, there we go. Got you. Oh, Helen, bless you. Thanks for being here. Hi, Kim. Let's just have a look. Donna, g'day. Oh, lovely. Elle, wonderful. Susan, lovely. Oh, Haley, she's got family from Wales as well. Oh, Mia, g'day. Hi, from Athens. Yeah, look, so thrilled you could join me live. Thank you so much. All right, so getting back to what these claims are, we can look at these claims in two camps. One is that they derive from the mystical tradition of the Celtic lands. And then the other are the later claims that it was the blood of Christ. Now, the Grail was around before Christ, okay? It goes back a long way. So if we look at it from the standpoint of the sacred feminine traditions, which go back to the Paleolithic times and then were formalized into a religion in the Neolithic times, and there is a lot of archaeological proof showing the sort of the anthropological customs of this time, we see that the Grail was in fact part of a very complex ancient religion. So we've been taught that, you know, the pagans were a bunch of godless heathens, but in fact they were a very reverent people, and they worshipped equally the Divine Father and the Earth Mother, which is very balanced, okay? And they sought to live lives of balance by aligning their lives to the natural cycles. And this is what's at the heart of the Grail tradition, which was a mystic tradition. So it wasn't about, you know, the monotheistic patriarchal religions that followed. They were very hierarchical. And there was a doctrine, a book of rules, of do's and don'ts, and it was very much about fearing punishment. Whereas the ancient religion was a religion of love, and it was one of celebration, and so celebrating all of the high points and the low points of the natural cycles, and midwifing people through those pivotal times of change. And that's, without the Grail, why so many people are really struggling at the moment, because we're going through a time of such pivotal change. And for those that haven't developed the inner mystic, change is terrifying, okay? So if we look at when the Grail resurfaced, this was in the 12th century, and it actually began in France, and then it spread through all the courts of Europe and England. And this is, you know, when we sort of saw Arthurian love poetry, again, because the Grail is very much about love. And the reason men would seek the Grail was so they could become a worthy suitor, all right? So, you know, the stories of the king that says, if you want to marry my daughter, then you have to go and seek the dragon woman, you know, which is the feminine mysteries. You have to go and face your fear of the dark, of the shadow, which is not evil. It's simply that which you don't know, that which is hidden. So, you know, up until then, we had the Middle Ages, which were very puritanical, very austere, and where women were demonized. Okay, so this is, you know, when there was 500 years of mystic women being burnt and drowned and publicly tortured. And this is because the empire knew that mystic women held the sacred knowledge, the secrets that would keep the populace empowered and sovereign. So they tried to wipe us all out so that the people would be easier to dominate. Because when people are dumbed down, when they're ignorant, when they're afraid of magic, when they're afraid of their own power, then they're easier to rule. And those that have awakened their serpent power, which is the bioelectricity of the earth, the force, they are not able to be ruled. They have their own inner authority, which is their heart's conscience. So this poetry and these stories and ballads that originally had been shared by the bards. Bards were druids that served as sacred vessels and did so by channeling their creativity and disseminating ancient wisdom teachings through stories, through song, through poetry. So it was a very sacred profession. And they were ones that had done many initiations in the temples and the mystery schools. And so they would sort of travel through the towns as troubadours and balladeers and poets and storytellers. And this was entertainment, you know, they'd set up in the town square like we see buskers today. But today, a lot of buskers, the sort of songs that people are singing about are sort of just romantic love, okay? So it wasn't about sacred love. And the ancients understood that without inviting the divine into a union, the union was doomed, okay? Because basically, if we're not aspiring to something greater than ourselves, we devolve, okay? We spiral downwards, and we tend to blame each other for the things that we don't like about ourselves, because we don't want to have to face the shadow in ourselves. And so this is the demise of love. And today we see a divorce rate of, 50%, and the average cost of a divorce is $30,000, which is also the price of most patriarchal weddings. So that's a $60,000 investment, and yet people aren't making the investment in the mysteries, which is to learn the sacred love arts, and that's what the Grail taught. So, after women had been vilified for so long, it was a breath of fresh air to have this love poetry coming out, and it was coming because of the Crusades to the Middle East. The Middle East, the Sufis, they had kept the mystic traditions alive, albeit hidden, like the Grail had to go underground in the West. But the poetry was inspired by the Grail, which wasn't just practiced in Europe and England. It was practiced, going right back to Sumer in Mesopotamia. So, this was a widespread phenomenon, okay? And we even see the Grail tradition, albeit by a different name, in the Native American tradition and the Polynesian tradition. So it was something that my understanding was it was anchored, by the very advanced civilizations such as Lemuria, Atlantis, and Mesopotamia. And these were, civilizations that were more advanced than we are today. So we have this kind of misnomer that, we're oh so civilized and oh so advanced. But really, we've lost a lot of ground because of what was suppressed and outlawed by the empire. And, I rewatched the film Gladiator last week, and, in the opening of it, they speak about the fact that Rome dominated 1/4 of the planets, one quarter of our planet. Interesting slip. And the other thing I wanted to say, for those of you that have recently watched my event Shift into the Light, which is available on my YouTube channel and on Rumble, I spoke about the symbol of the UN and how it's an aerial view of the North Pole, and it shows the laurel wreath of victory over the pole. Well, when I was watching Gladiator, I saw that same wreath, and it was the symbol of the empire. So the empire is still with us today. It's just rebranded. Okay, so when we see Luke fighting the empire in Star Wars, it's like that is what we are journeying as a mythos archetypally right now. We're facing off with the empire. And that same symbol was used by the Nazis. So we see it's the same entity again and again. And so it's all come to a head right now. And the Grail plays a very pivotal part in returning to Eden, in recovering from the genocide of those who were one with the earth, whether that was the mystic women, whether that was the indigenous people, but those who remembered the old ways, those who practiced the sacred traditions of the earth, because that is what poses the greatest threat to the empire, to the state. And that's because this is what holds the key to empowering the people. So my book, The Grail, will be out on the 22nd of the 2nd, 2022. It's significant that at that date, they're going to be staging an Olympics to charge up that Illuminati symbol at that 222 portal in communist China. So I encourage you to read the Grail book to counterpoint that when it comes out on that date. So anyway, I speak about how potent symbols are and how our symbols have been hijacked in my Grail book, because, and also I alluded to that in the Shift into the Light presentation, because they are basically magical sigils. So a sigil is when we take a word and we condense it down to form a symbol, and then we charge that symbol up repeatedly with intention. And today we know those as logos, okay? So the 1% are using a knowledge of, the magical arts, of the occult, to influence, to dominate. And the populace has been so dumbed down about magic, about how to wield energy consciously, they don't realize how they're being manipulated by the dark arts, by those that don't have their best interests in heart. So we need to reclaim our understanding of magic, and this is why Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, it speaks to us as a collective, because it speaks to that part which we long for, which leaves us feeling incomplete. And it's not just fantasy or make-believe as we're told as children. It is a part of the living universe and very much a part of who we are. So anyway, I'm digressing because I get excited, but where am I going? So there were two main stories that came out about the Grail in the 12th century, and they both had the same themes, the same kind of storyline even, and they both echoed the fact that young men need to seek out the wisdom of the feminine if they're not going to become the Fisher King, a man that is crippled, a man that's chased power and status and become soul sick and lost his way as a soul. And so we see the theme in both of these stories where the male ego is severed. Okay, in one of them we see a man's head presented on a silver platter. Another one has drops of blood on a lance. So it's understandable that uninitiated men fear the feminine mysteries. They fear losing their power to the feminine if they submit their will to enter into the mystery and be initiated. But, that's when we interpret the mystery from a patriarchal view, which views death as literal and physical, not as metaphorical. So these images, these symbols in these stories relate to the death of the ego, okay, which is necessary for a man to mature, for a man to fulfill his ultimate potential. So, that men run away like Peter Pan from being initiated is their greatest downfall, their greatest hubris or arrogance. And so after 5,000 years of patriarchy, that is the greatest challenge that we face, that men are afraid of the feminine and of the power of the feminine, whether they will admit it even to themselves or not. So, I'm just going to scroll down. Then there was another guy called Robert de Boron, and he wrote a poem, this is again in the 12th century, called Merlin. And he claimed Merlin was the Antichrist, the son of the devil and a virgin. Now, the term virgin originally meant a woman unto herself, a sovereign sacred woman, a priestess. And that term got, distorted into meaning a girl that hadn't yet had sex. So the point is, the Merlins were, I guess, an equivalent to the Magdalens. Okay, these were titles. There wasn't just one Merlin. A Merlin was like the high priest of the Druidic tradition. So he was a man that was very wise, that had humbled his ego through initiation many, many times, and often worked alongside the Magdalene, the high priestess. She would be initiating the women, he would be initiating the men. And so for this story to come out and, create a slur against the Merlin, it's a flag that there's an agenda behind his story, and that it is to, create a fear of mysticism and the ancient mystic tradition of the Grail. So this was the guy who was the first to come up with the idea of the sword and the stone. You might have heard of Arthur, pulling the sword out of the anvil, and that determined his right to rule as the High King of England. Well, that's just something this guy made up, and as we can see, his kind of background's a bit dodgy. The other thing is, he said that the date when Arthur pulled this sword out of the stone was Christmas Eve, which, is celebrated around the world on the 25th of December. Now, that's exactly 4 days after the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. This was when men would return from the Holy Grail annual rite done in the forest. So again, we see the assimilation of the ancient traditions trying to be absorbed into the new religion of Christianity, as it was created by Rome. It was a religious cult created by Rome. So this isn't any way to defame the work of Yeshua. It's actually to reclaim its integrity because it was stolen, distorted, and he was misrepresented. So this same author, Robert de Boron, he said that he received a vision of Yeshua handing him the Grail and claimed it was used in the Last Supper. Now, I agree that it was definitely part of the Last Supper. And I also agree that Yeshua was inexorably linked to the Grail, okay? He served it. His partner was a Magdalene, okay, a woman that initiated men and women into the Grail mysteries. But De Boron was the one that was the first to say, so therefore, based on my vision, the Grail is the sacrificial blood of Yeshua. So that's where that claim comes from someone that had a great hatred and was trying to create a smear campaign towards the mystics. And ever since that claim was made, then the party began, okay? There were numerous claims that followed with competing parties saying, I'm the one that's got the blood of Christ. I'm the one that's got the cup that collected it. And the most well-known one came from the Vatican. Now, they asserted that the Grail was the holy chalice of Valencia, an ornate ceremonial goblet, which is now, a tourist attraction. But the style of the cup isn't even congruent with first century goblets. And there's a very convoluted backstory about how it even ended up in Spain, which is where the Spanish Inquisition had their headquarters. So again, that raises a flag. And it was said that it was collected by Peter, the apostle who most openly opposed Mary the Magdalene. So, kind of debunk that. But still today, there are rewards for anybody who can locate the missing cup that was used at the Last Supper. But the idea of gathering blood from a tortured man is, first of all, repugnant. And that someone would even conjure that speaks to the level that they're operating at, okay, which is vampiric. It's one born of the sacrifice of others. And, I referred to the Olympics earlier. Originally, the Olympics, by the patriarchs, only men could go, okay? And the young boys that were competing had to do so naked, and their sweat was collected as a ritual sacrifice. And this is when pedophilia was accepted. The learned men of ancient Greece would take on a young boy as their student, and the young boy's family would consent to him going and living with the old guy. In order to get an education, he had to, give him sexual favors in exchange. So this is where this has all come from. So we wonder why pedophilia is so huge today as a seedy sort of underbelly that underpins all the corruption in our waking world. It's come from, the Greco-Roman culture, the patriarchs, who derive power through, power over, through dominating others and asserting their will over others. And this is what the Grail opposed, okay? So originally, the Grail was the sacred blood of the womb, the life-giving blood that had the power to heal. So it was honored as this life-giving elixir that could heal cuts, that could, even help reverse the effects of aging, similar to how we're using stem cells today. So, it did not carry the lower vibrational signature of sacrificial blood of torture you know. So the idea of collecting blood from a man who's in pain, carrying that energetic signature and using that in rites is just, I mean, it's dark. That's dark magic. And yet today we still see children being initiated into Holy Communion, which is to commemorate this, to symbolically drink the blood of a tortured man. And these are children that are too young to make informed consent about taking part in a ritual. And ritual is very powerful. It's very, very potent because it's pledging an allegiance within our energy body. You know, even when people make the sign of the cross, they're literally charging up that symbol of the crucifix, of torture and suffering, of the power of the empire using the energy field of their own bodies. And again, because people have been dumbed down, they don't realize, they just do it without thinking, you know, blindly like sheep, hence they were referred to as a flock. And, you know, just like a rancher would brand their herd, they have been branded, they are owned, they are not sovereign, they are not a free people. And that's why the only sovereign in an empire is the one at the top of the pyramid. So I mentioned that, you know, I do believe the Grail was part of the Last Supper. And that is because they came together to do ceremony knowing full well that Yeshua was being taken the next day to be crucified. Joseph of Arimathea had organized specifically with his power and influence as a wealthy merchant that Yeshua be hung on the Friday, okay, so that at midnight, when it became the Sabbath, the Saturday, he would be taken down so that he didn't die. Of course, he sustained terrible wounds, but that window of grace would enable him to recover. And it's then that he went into hiding in India, back to where he had been initiated after his bar mitzvah. And there's a very good documentary that was produced by the Indian government, which you can see on YouTube, which details all of that. So, yeah, so they were drinking, not the blood, they were drinking the symbol of the blood. So, you know, that could have been red wine, could have been pomegranate juice, but it's a willingness to drink from the cup of death, not a physical death, but an ego death, of letting go of my will and surrendering to thy will. So that's what they were doing the night before the crucifixion. And that's why Mari was anointing his feet in spikenard, which is the sacred oil that opens the chakras, the 7 gates, so they have the same spin rate, so that he would be able to transcend that experience of torture at a physical level as a soul. So, you know, when we interpret the mysteries from a literal or a fundamental perspective, we distort their meaning because we can't grasp it at a higher level. So, yeah, and my intention here is not to condemn anyone who's been indoctrinated into Catholicism. You know, I see that we need, just like people that are rescued from any cult, they need to be deprogrammed. They need to have the truth because a lie has been perpetrated on them repeatedly, cyclically, which is how we learn. You know, as children, if we want to learn something, we do it again and again through repetition. It's why those that are watching the television succumb to, you know, the mass hypnosis, because they're receiving the same message again and again and again. It's the power of repetition. So if people are, you know, showing up once a week or more than once a week and hearing the same message, doing the same actions, it is programming them to not think for themselves, to hand over their allegiance to an external authority and be part of a group mind, a herd. And it's that herd mentality that we're seeing at the moment, which is being challenged by those that have extricated themselves from the matrix to remember themselves as sovereign. And they're saying to the herd, you don't need the protection of the herd. It's safe to be yourself. You know, we're living in different times, and unplug from the matrix, the thought prison. So, you know, when I'm just going to have a drink, hang on. The significance of this distortion of our sacred rights, our sacred knowledge, whatever we believe, what is central to our values has the power to motivate and inspire our actions. So this is why, you know, we can try and introduce change, whether it's through voting in different political leaders or different parties, or, you know, lobbying for social change. But unless we get to the absolute root of it, which is our beliefs, what we hold most dear and sacred, our sacred truths, unless we understand the deception that has been perpetrated, then we can't truly be free, okay? Because all change starts with a single thought. And the legacy of worshipping an act of violence, okay, it sends the message, and I'm speaking of the crucifixion, it constantly anchors the message that if you dare go against the empire, you will suffer for it, okay? So every person that's, you know, wearing a crucifix, or they've got a crucifix tattooed on them, they are more afraid to speak up, to put their head up above the crowd and say, I disagree, right? Because they've had it anchored and anchored and anchored that you've got to do what the group says, otherwise you won't survive. And, you know, at that level, we're children. We're not even teenagers. We're still operating as children, needing the protection of the group. So we're not going to progress as souls unless we can mature emotionally and psychologically to the level of adult. So just chronologically aging doesn't mean that you are becoming an adult, okay? There are many adults out there behaving like teenagers or children, and that's why the world is in the state that it is today, without the Grail to help people mature and grow. So because we're showing this act of violence as the most sacred emblem in the Western world, it anchors the answer is violence rather than personal transformation. That the most noble, sacred thing you can do is give your physical life for an ideal. And this is on this premise that they enlist men to go and fight in the war campaigns of the empire. And I'm speaking about all wars, okay? Even though they appear to be for different causes, if we didn't think it was an act of sacredness to fight, okay, to spill blood, you know, like the song Onward Christian Soldiers, we'd take one look at it and go, that's not honoring of life. That's not honoring of the sacrifice of the mother who gets up, you know, every 90 minutes around the clock to a newborn and is sleep deprived so that she can nurture and nourish that being with the milk of her body. You know, the sacrifice that it takes to nourish, to gestate a life, to birth, and to, you know, support that being to grow to a point where they are autonomous, to have the empire just take that away because they're portraying this idea that it is sacred to spill your blood, to the whole thing of Anzac Day, the poppies. I mean, when I was in Europe, you see fields and fields of poppies, which looks lovely, but what does it look like? A paddock of blood. So this is why they were synonymous with Anzac Day, which for us in Australia and New Zealand is the festival, patriarchal festival that celebrates the fallen soldiers. In the ancient world, that was known as the festival of the dying god, where we honoured the men that were willing to seek the Grail by having an ego death over winter. So that's been taken and distorted into glorifying the victims of war, the pawns, as heroes. That's not what it is to be a hero. So the hero's journey, made popular by Joseph Campbell, that was part of the ancient Grail tradition. So the hero's journey is an internal journey. It's about fighting the demons within, the dragon within, the fears and the saboteur that will stop a man from fulfilling his greatest destiny. So, it's like we've got to unpack this, and we've got to tease out the truth from the fiction if we want to move ahead. So I'll just check in, see if there's any questions or comments, because I know I'm just talking at you. The book will be out the 22nd of February, so that's deliberate, 222. But the Kindle is available to pre-order now. If you've got a question on anything I've said so far, just put it in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer it. Someone's asked, will I do the book in audio? My intention is to do it. It just depends if I have enough time to do that, record it all before the launch date. So we'll see what's graceful. Yes, you are named after somewhere magical, Avalon. Has anyone got any questions? No? All right. If you've got a question, type it in the chat if you're here live, and I'll circle back. So, where are we? Right, let's talk about the deception of the bloodlines. Oh, here we go. I've got a question from Karen. What about the modern mothers who have sons, as I do, who are obsessed with martial arts, jiu-jitsu, tossing and tumbling? Look, I can only give my opinion on that, and I think that's awesome, especially jiu-jitsu, because it teaches somebody to use the force of the opponent against them. So it's actually a defensive, sacred art. And it's important for boys to empower the archetype of the sacred warrior, which is Ares in the, Greece pantheon. He's the male archetype that governs the sacral. So, boys have a lot of energy, and they need to channel that energy. Otherwise, it becomes destructive. So if there can be, an acceptable form of learning how to use their energy, and in a way that is honoring of the life force. So the martial arts that, they're not just about reckless violence, they're about honoring the light and the dark and learning to manage the forces within us. So I see it as a very healthy thing for young boys. What I'm opposed to is the using of brute force for the acquisition of status, power, land, resources, So yeah, two different things completely. So what's happened was the sacred warrior was cut off at the knees and turned into a pawn in the industrial military complex. So the warrior has been disempowered. Yes, true. I agree with you, Joanne. People worship the Pope like an emperor. Oh, interesting. Tricia says World Boxing Championships are held over the October full moon, generates mass collective energy celebrating violence. Glad you see it, and thank you for acknowledging it and sharing it here. Yeah, I used to notice that, winter solstice, they'd always release a film like World War Z or something really bloody dystopian, but a violent, to harness and leverage the dark. So, yeah, there's occult knowledge behind all of that manipulation. So I'm going to speak about, how the Da Vinci Code grabbed the world's attention with its claims that the Grail was the womb of Mary the Magdalene, and that the bloodline of Yeshua and Mary was, the true Sang Grail, the sacred blood. Honestly, I think that's horseshit. A lot of the information from that book was taken from a book written 20 years earlier called Holy Blood, Holy Grail by Michael Bagent and Richard Lee. This is another flag. The dynastic families, those that have ruled in the hierarchy that has been in place, they are the ones that are absolutely obsessed with genetic bloodlines, with, keeping their bloodline what they call pure. All right. Now, Harry Potter kind of spoke to that, with referring to people as mudbloods that weren't, or what they would call a blue blood. Basically, it's inbreeding amongst the dynastic families. And it's all just to keep in place their assets, okay? But there's nothing pure about it. And to claim that the Grail has anything to do with a genetic bloodline, that is just way off. So, but again, it's created, more conjecture, more confusion to disorient people away from the true Grail. So the word Sangral, Sangraal, means sacred vessel. And it refers to the womb of any initiated woman. What do I mean by that? A woman who has been initiated into the Grail tradition, which is learning how to honor her cycles and learning how to honor herself as a sacred vessel, because the womb within every woman is connected to the cosmic womb at the galactic center of our universe. So at new moon, women can seed intentions by attuning their womb to the cosmic womb. We have this power to create within us, not just physical life, but to seed intentions. And this is why women, weren't allowed to gather, to do ceremony, because of the power that we have within us. So, the word Grail, which is spelled Grail, sometimes it's spelled Grail, Graal, is derived from the Sangral. So if you look at a woman's body, we each look like a vase, a different vase. Every vase is a different shape and equally beautiful. So every woman is a conduit or a vessel for the Grail, the sacred life-giving blood. So, the ancient world honored the sacredness of women as vessels for the Earth Mother. So that's why, the violence that we see perpetrated on women today is directly a result of us losing the Grail mysteries. So we're seeing it coming back with more womb awareness, with more girls being initiated into their womanhood, with the grassroots global movement of the Red Tent, women gathering at new moon as a practice to own their shadow, which is something I teach. If you're interested to know more, you can go to my website, themoonwoman.com. So, you know, the Grail was always represented in sacred ceremony as a cup, a bowl, or a receptacle. In the Tantric tradition, we see it as the mortar and pestle. It's the sacred container, that which is receptive to the divine spark, to inspiration, to intuition. So one has to be in their feminine. They have to be open, humble, and receptive, able to receive from the divine. And we only get that through pledging our allegiance to the divine. Now, the empire distorted that into pledging our allegiance to the empire. Okay, so that's done with the pledging of allegiance to the flag. You know, I mean, again, we see the Olympic Games, nationalism, all of that. It's all, so it's not pledging to the only power that exists, which is the power of the infinite, the divine. Whether you call that divine Allah or source or great mystery or God, it's all one and the same, okay? It's the energy of pure consciousness and loving wisdom. And anything that is not an embodiment of that is an aberration, it's a distortion. So the idea of this divine, benevolent intelligence that runs through all of life as punishing, as one that we need to seek forgiveness from, as one that we should feel separate from and unworthy, is all a distortion of the empire to keep the consciousness operating at a low, dense vibration, so they're more susceptible to illness, physically, emotionally, and mentally. So this is what we are transcending at the moment. And so everything's coming up to be seen in the light of day. So the Grail did not just refer to the physical womb of an initiated woman, or to the life-giving blood that circled within an initiated woman's womb, but to the wisdom that she distilled within her womb, within her sacred blood. This is the wisdom of the cycles. In other words, the more that we journey the seasons, the lunar cycle, the solar cycle, the planetary transits, our chronological life phases, consciously observing them humbly, learning, understanding that cosmos and nature are our teachers, the more that we humble the ego, the more our soul expands, the more we become a way shower, a guide and a light for others. And so this actually changes the frequency of the blood of our womb. And this is why sacred amulets were painted with the same Grail. You know, again, we see the Bible changes that into slaying baby lambs and painting their blood around the doorways to protect people. I mean, again, we're seeing this, the blood of violence being held up in a sacred way. And war itself is a big act of ritual violence to, you know, through that bloodshed, that bloodletting, to gain power through the dark arts for the dark lords. I mean, it's really, you know, we have to look at this and acknowledge it. So, you know, every woman that makes peace with her womb, every woman that honors her cycle by saying, right, it's that time of the month, I'm going to go within, it's when I'm closest to the divine, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to do art, I'm going to attend to my soul needs, is helping to restore the Grail. And every man that humbles his ego to seek initiation from a wise woman is seeking the Grail. Now, I'm noticing I've gone nearly an hour already, so I won't go much longer. Oh, good for you, Trisha, doing your first red tent. Awesome. Interesting. Bodybuilding competitions are also done around October as a show of male dominance. Yeah, it's like once you start seeing it, boom, 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 boom. It's like it's everywhere in plain sight. So that gives you a taste. There was a lot more I was going to speak about, but yeah, kind of got on a tangent there. But you can go and access chapter 2 now if you pre-order via the link in the description. And yeah, there I go through it in detail as to debunking the myths and the lies about the Grail and sharing what the truth is. And the more people who know the truth, the more we will reawaken this beautiful way of living in union, sacred union with the earth, with the cycles of, the heavenly spheres, so that we can stop perpetrating violence on ourselves, each other, and the earth through lack of awareness. Okay. So a big thanks to those of you who joined me live today. Thank you. I really appreciate the support, and I hope that you found it interesting. Nikki says, what about the Crohn's? Do you mean Crohn's? I'm not sure. I think you might mean Crohn's in terms of how women can honor their Grail if they're no longer bleeding. So, got you. Thanks for clarifying. So, basically, attuning to new moon, which is 2 weeks after full moon, is the equivalent of a non-fertile woman's period. So, by honoring that as your, your inward time, your soul nourishment time, and then, at full moon, which is today, being of service and connecting in your community and spreading the love. Title of the new book, Carrie, is called The Grail, and there's a link to it in the description to go find out more. And it's for men and women, because the Grail was not just for women, not just for menstruating women. In fact, men need this more than ever. I'm currently initiating men into various Grail practices. And just yesterday, one of them, they're all saying how much they're getting out of it, but one of them, I'd offered it to him free because, as a woman trying to attract men to do this course, a lot of men won't listen. So it was like, okay, if a brother invites them, maybe they'll do it. So I offered the course to a few friends of mine and said, would you invite other men to do it? And he came back yesterday and he was like, I have to pay you. I'm getting so much out of this. So when men do drink from the Grail, when they, find insight into their soul to help them to remember all of who they are and fulfill their potential and journey, the hero's journey consciously in alignment with the solar wheel, they activate the sacred masculine, and that's what's needed on the planet, because our men were disempowered through the loss of the Grail, and that's how we're going to come back to our sacred sovereign power. So I invite you to share this if you found it in any way insightful, and thanks for joining me live. All right, ciao for now, everybody. See you.